Everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Hugh Vandeveer. I'm Associate Director of Annual Giving here at the college and a proud member of the class of 1991, which is in the sweet spot for tonight's discussion. So let me introduce our speaker, our discussion leader. Dr. Jim Cherry is an Associate Professor and Chair of the Theater at Wabash. Might I add, nationally ranked theater department. Jim primarily teaches classes in theater history and dramatic literature at the college, with topics ranging from Greek tragedy to the contemporary New York stage. Jim's research is equally varied, from melodramatic parodies of Uncle Tom's Cabin to representations of 9/11 in contemporary performance. Jim has the chance to direct a play every year at Wabash, and his tastes range from the classical, Shakespeare's Two Gentlemen of Verona and Macbeth, Euripides, The Bacchae, to contemporary, Arthur Miller's Incident at Vichy, and Nick Dear's Frankenstein, and a radio theater production of the works of Edgar Allan Poe entitled The Twisted Tales of Poe. He also hits the boards on occasion when an older male performer is needed, as in Prospero and the Tempest and Black Stash and Peter and the Starcatcher. He also serves as Wabash's faculty marshal. When not in the theater, Jim can be found hanging around with his wife, Crystal Benedicts, who's associate professor and chair of the English department, and their 3 children. He also enjoys cooking, puttering around the house, reading contemporary fiction, and watching the Red Sox pummel the Yankees. So without further ado, may I present After the Bell, Beyond Friends, Flannel, and Frosted Tips, Teaching 90s as History. Dr. Cherry?
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Hugh. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. And also to Emily Vetney and Natalie Hertz for organizing this. You know, it's like a total cliche at this point to talk about the positive aspects of the coronavirus pandemic. I think newfound appreciations for crossword puzzles and bread making, I think, come to mind. But like the fact that this kind of virtual setting is now something that we can kind of expect and hope for and enjoy, I think is just really cool. To begin, I just want to make clear that I don't want this to be a lecture. As someone who was born smack dab in the middle of Gen X, that demographic cohort for those born between 1965 and 1980, 1973, okay? I can blather on about the 90s for hours, okay? And I just want to send out a shout out to my fellow Gen Xers here in the room today, okay? You know, we may never get to be president, but at least we got to watch MTV while it was cool. So that's but the 90s, as for many of us, I suspect, was for me a time of immense personal change. I graduated from high school. I went to college. I graduated from college. I went to graduate school for a master's degree. I finished a master's degree. I started a PhD program. I lived in 4 different states. I lived in 2 major cities. And I met the woman who I would marry, Professor Crystal Benedicts of the English department. So the 90s for me were very much about youth and movement and experimentation and trying to figure out who I was and what was next, which is a very 90s way to think about the 90s, I think. But I think that this is worth saying kind of from the outset, that my 90s may not be the same as your 90s. My 90s was determined very much by where I was born, the color of my skin, what my parents did for a living, 1,000 other particulars besides. The 90s in suburban Connecticut was not the same as the 90s in South Central LA. So to the extent that we can even talk about the 90s, we also need to recognize that, like any other decade,
I don't know how to get it up on the screen.
the meaning of the 90s means something very different to different people.
Yeah.
And what the 90s means to newly minted Wabash students was what my freshman tutorial course that I taught this past fall was all about. And so the first spark of doing a class on the 90s came from a conversation with a young man named Sebastian Wang, who graduated from Wabash in 2022. And this was before an immersion trip that we were taking to New York City in the spring of 2019. And so this course and its immersion trip, which thanks to the generosity of John and Diane Schroeder, I'll be leading again this fall, a class called New York City on Stage and Screen. In that class, we look at New York City in theater and in film and in popular culture generally. This immersion trip is a week of workshops with friends of mine who work in the theater, museums, theater going, and learning the art of eating a slice of pizza from a folded paper plate while walking to and from all of these things. But it was in a conversation that I had with Sebastian that he admitted his love, his deep, personal, and abiding love for the television show Friends. And when he said this to me, I was incredulous, I think is probably a kind word. I said, so Ross, Rachel, Chandler, Joey, Phoebe, Monica, Central Perk. And he's like, yes, absolutely. I love that show. Everybody I know watches that show. All my friends watch it. It's really comforting. And I was surprised by this. And I started asking around to other students. Other students said, yeah, they watch this show. I talked to my millennial sister-in-law, and she said, yeah, I know she's also really interested in this show too. So it's more of a millennial Gen Z type thing. But for Sebastian, there was a genuine sense of connection with this show, even nostalgia for a show that represents, I think in a lot of our minds, an era that he didn't even experience in any way directly. He went on to write a very good paper, a research paper about Friends, and specifically its depiction of race in a New York City that's really about as white as any Woody Allen film. But it was sort of interesting, and it kind of stuck in my mind as to like what is it about this show that my students and my sister-in-law find so appealing. And I think in part it has to do with a representation of friendship that is utterly unmediated, that is completely unplugged from devices and screens and social media. There are no selfies. There is no Insta. There is just friends in Friends. And so this conversation, kept me thinking about how students now, students who would have been born in 2004, 2005, would think about the 90s generally. And the time was rolling around for me to teach a freshman tutorial. So many of you, who graduated from Wabash might remember your freshman tutorial and what the purpose of a freshman tutorial is. I think Julian Whitney spoke a month ago about his tutorial, which was admin. But a tutorial is really meant to encourage critical thinking, group cohesion, bolstering student confidence for speaking in class, setting up the expectations for what we want in a demanding college seminar discussion. We have students do some serious writing. We get them into the library and do some research. It's also an opportunity for their advisor, which I am in this case, to check in with them on a regular basis, to remind them that they need to meet with me. It's a really good class for keeping tabs on the student experience at a time when that sort of transition to college can be very difficult for students. But this tutorial also happens to be, or tutorial in general, happens to be one of the few classes where you really, at the end of the day, don't have to cover anything, right? There is no necessary forced march to get to a particular amount of content. No one is going to worry about whether students are going to be equipped to pass the MCATs, just coming out of freshman tutorial. What that means is that there's a whole lot of freedom in a class like that to experiment. And that's what I think a lot of my colleagues do, is sort of use tutorial as a place to play around with ideas and to experiment with topics and just try to get down to the bottom of some ideas that are kind of percolating in our heads. Up until this point, I had taught another tutorial on 9/11 in American culture. And the first time I taught that class, students in that class remembered 9/11, or maybe had a kind of manufactured memory of 9/11. And the next time I taught that class, those students didn't. And what came from that was I suddenly realized I had to go about teaching that class in a radically different way. It was a shift in just a few years from what is a current event to being a historical event. And considering the amount of time that's happened since 9/11, which is 22 years, right? There's been a lot of history. And the 90s feel a long, long way away, I think, right now. But of course, that also doesn't mean, and I'm gonna, hold on one second. Okay, are we seeing a PowerPoint with a picture that says 90s shop on it? No? Let me try that again, hold on. Okay, we got that? All right, excellent. So what we do start to see, and I noticed this in our local Kroger supermarket in I think it was August of 2022. It was a sign, I believe, that it was now time for me to teach this tutorial because this little laminated cardboard box labeled 90s shop showed up in our local Kroger. And sort of in looking in, like what exactly constitutes this 90s shop? Well, we see scrunchies. There are a kind of bandanas that women might wear in their hair. There's like banana clips. There's little tiny little hair clips of various sizes. All of this, I mean, I have to say, sort of feels to me a little both 80s and 90s, maybe not necessarily 90s specific. But it was clearly the 90s as an era shows some commercial possibilities, right? Because I think we have, in general, a very fond memory of the 90s. By today's standards, it feels like an era of relative peace and security, a time that the cultural critic Chuck Klosterman described as a period when the world was starting to go crazy, but not so crazy that it was unmanageable or irreparable. And that feeling, I think, resonated a lot with me in thinking about this period. And Klosterman's book, which I like, and if you're interested in this subject, I encourage you to go out and get it. I don't agree with everything that he says, and I think he was a challenging read for our students because. I mean, it's kind of like a history book, but it's also kind of like an Atlantic article. And so it sort of splits the difference between traditional scholarship and something that's a bit more popular and stylized. But it underscores so many of the ways that things were happening in the 90s that kind of bubbled to the surface in the 21st century. And something that he mentions, for instance, eccentric billionaires tapping into populist streaks while using technology and innovative ways to bypass traditional media. I mean, this is not to say that Ross Perot and Donald Trump are the same or even similar, but there are certainly echoes, I think, between those two figures. Now, what the 90s, which Klosterman describes, can be called the long 90s, which he takes from the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 to 9/11 in 2001. So basically, from the end of the Cold War to the beginning of the War on Terror. And if we imagine those two, amazingly critical epic-making moments as bookends, what's in the middle seems like a very peaceful place. The threat of nuclear holocaust, which haunted the planet since the 1950s, suddenly abates. Islamic extremism was a threat, but not really for Americans during this time. Although in that perspective, the first World Trade Center bombing, which took place in 1993, which our students, by the way, don't know anything about. The embassy bombings in Tanzania and Kenya, the bombing of the USS Cole, there's obviously a pattern to be seen in hindsight. Climate change, certainly, with fears about the ozone layer and CFCs, a problem, but probably one that could be dealt with at a later time. So there was, I think, a sense, at least at this remove of the 90s as a stable time, different from today. So I worked up this tutorial. Students signed up for it, and over the summer I sent them the Klosterman book with the instructions to read it. And I also asked them a question. Okay. So the first was to talk to someone a generation older than you about their recollections of life in the 1990s. And during your discussion, please ask them the following question: what 3 words mean the 90s to you? And then email these words directly to me. You'll also note the next sentence, important, please complete this part of the assignment within a week of receiving this letter. I learned a lot about my students, about who sent those words when. I would say about a third got them in within the week. But this is what they sent back. And so they talked to their parents, and in some cases, older siblings, and I think in at least one case, grandparents, and asked them about what words came to mind when they said the 90s. Now, and I put these in a word cloud, with the larger ones being mentioned more than once. So what do you see in this?
pop culture. See a lot of pop culture in there.
There's a ton of pop culture. Yeah, we look at something like the fact that grunge is the word, right? It came up, I think, like a third of the time. Somebody said something like grunge. Words like music, Nirvana, Sublime, Pearl Jam, Titanic, Jordan, all of these things, MTV, NBA, Party, baggy, which I'm assuming refers to jeans, those big gigantic jeans from the late 90s. I'm assuming that's what those are. So there is a whole lot of other there's a whole lot of pop culture here. Other things that come up in this.
I see some things that aren't even around anymore, and some things that laid the groundwork for things that are still around.
Like what?
Blockbuster's gone. People say grunge is gone, but it still is around. MTV isn't what it used to be.
Right.
Blackberries are gone.
Totally.
You know what I'm fascinated by is I did this exercise as you were saying it before you popped it up, and I put down grunge, internet, so there's enough internet stuff.
Yeah.
I put Clinton. I just think of Bill Clinton very much defined the 90s. I don't see him anywhere there.
He's not. And I was really struck by that too. That it is. I mean, he was president for virtually the entire decade, right? And I mean, he was seen as a kind of celebrity president. He was this, young, kind of, boomer, charismatic guy. Won, re-election handily. Had a 73% approval rating after being impeached, and yet he doesn't make this list, right? He didn't make. I mean, granted, this is 16, people who are being interviewed, but that did the Clintons not making this list was interesting to me. Yeah, other.
I would say going off of what Dion was talking about in the chat. Not mentioned O.J. Simpson,
Yep.
Rodney King,
Yep.
a lot of boiling points that happened. As somebody who was in grad school for journalism at the time, and OJ happens, and all of a sudden I'm going, this seems to be the end of journalism. Because all of a sudden OJ was on every channel. He was on sports channels. They created Court TV for it.
Right.
So yeah, that was huge.
Yeah.
I'm surprised prosperity's not mentioned.
Yeah, I know recession is, but there was like maybe 12 months of recession, and like Mike is saying, the rest of the decade was pretty prosperous.
Yeah, pretty prosperous. I found I hadn't thought of the word latchkey for a long time, and I was kind of struck by that coming up. I mean, thinking about those, like the growing, regularity of the two-income household, and you have kids coming home, from school and making themselves a snack and doing their homework or not doing their homework. Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it was. I was actually even kind of struck by words like confusing, explosive, tragedy, and while those things they're not hyper specific about what it is that was meant there. Anyway, so thinking about the course, so we talked about a lot of the various historical events that shaped the 90s, and the Klosterman book is actually pretty good about giving students. It may not be, it's not chronological, but a pretty good sweep of the major issues in the 90s. Talking about Clinton, obviously, but also Newt Gingrich, the Lewinsky scandal, Ruby Ridge, the siege at Waco, the Columbine massacres, the Oklahoma City bombing, the Rodney King verdict, OJ, Y2K as well. We talked a lot in that class about what the internet was like before social media, an internet that, I think I lost it. Oh, well, I had this totally queued up. I had like that awesome, an amazing sound cue of what the internet sounded like when you started it in like 1998, where you have all the beeps and the buzzing and then the different sort of like tone of buzzing and then that sound. And I found that on YouTube, and it was a 30-second clip, and it had 15 million views. I was like, that's just insane. It's a crazy thing. So yeah, we read a number of texts. We read Nick Hornby's High Fidelity, which was made into a film that maybe some of you have seen with John Cusack in 2000. John Cusack and Lisa Bonet, and then more recently made into a Hulu series with Lisa Bonet's daughter, Zoe Kravitz. We read Neil Gaiman's Sandman. We read Tony Kushner's Angels in America. We watched Clerks. We watched Reservoir Dogs. We watched in conjunction with a colleague of mine, Matt Weedman, who's an art professor who also had a freshman tutorial, but his tutorial was on horror cinema. And so we blended them together, and we did 90s horror movies. And we watched Scream and the Blair Witch Project. So those were the texts that we engaged with in class. Kind of a mixture, right? A novel, a play, a graphic novel, and some various movies of different genres. I also introduced them to a lot of different people. I had class visitors coming in. I had a friend of mine, a former roommate from New York, who was in the Midwest for a Michigan football game, and he drove out to Crawfordsville to talk to the students about radio station consolidation in the 1990s. Math professor Colin McKinney played 90s video games with them in the basement of the library. Professor Molly Abels talked about 90s music videos with them and the importance of music videos to the music industry. They wrote papers on a huge number of topics, ranging from Ruby Ridge to conspiracies surrounding Kurt Cobain's death, to Peyton Manning's rookie season. And their entire charge was to continuously write and research and present their findings on topics that they were really driven, and interested in throughout the semester. And I think it was a really successful class. I certainly had a lot of fun with it. And I just wanted to just touch on a couple of things before we get to sort of a more of a broad conversation. So a few things that I gleaned from this course, and it's a course that I think I'm interested in doing again for sure, is that Gen Z has an enormous amount of knowledge about 90s culture, but not so much about 90s history. I think right now the 90s falls into not quite history. I suspect that will probably change, within the next, 10 years or so. At least it ought to. There is a way in which, the first Gulf War kind of becomes amalgamated into the second one. I think in the minds of students, the culture that the '90s culture that they have access to is culture that they have gleaned through 21st century technology. When people in the '90s had to record television programs on VCRs, they had to record songs off of radios. I'm just having a flashback to listening to Casey Kasem and trying to get a song off the radio and being flummoxed by that. Renting movies one at a time from a video store or getting them out of the library, which was also a thing. Our students just stream them. You can listen to 90s music on Spotify for days. But interestingly, when it comes to things like television, you can binge watch Friends, right? You can binge watch Seinfeld. You can binge watch Sister Sister. You can binge watch all kinds of '90s, television programs. But it is still kind of curated, right? Those shows that were like Friends replicas, like your Single Guys and Suddenly Susans, do not make those streaming platforms. And I will say, and I'll just sort of end this here, that teaching this class allowed me, and it was not really by intention, but it was the nature of this class and the students of this class allowed me to get the chance to have what I got to say has to be the most successful group project I think I've ever been involved with, and it came out of this almost encyclopedia-like knowledge that students have for 90s music and culture. At least these students who signed up for this tutorial. And I sort of had this as just kind of an idea that might be fun to do at the end of the semester, was to come up with the ultimate 90s playlist. Okay, which it sounds easy enough, right? And so we all talked in class about songs that we really liked from the '90s, and we made up a list. We made up a Spotify list for it, and then sooner or later it came up to 113 songs. Okay, and I was just like, wow, that's a lot of music. All right, and then I was like, well, in the '90s, we would never have. You could have 113 songs, but you'd have them, spread out, over, dozens of CDs. I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if we made a playlist that you could fit onto an actual CD? All right. But that meant that we had to stick with the limitations that we had in the 1990s, which is to say 700 megabytes. Okay. So 700 megabytes is 80 minutes of music. And so this was our charge, was to put together the ultimate 90s mix. Basically, I at this point I turned to the class and I was like, well, how do you propose we actually go about doing this? Like this, I don't know. I have no idea how really to solve this problem. And everyone kind of took off, and we were all just pitching ideas, and so what we came up with was, and this befits, I think, a classroom, of 16, 18 to 21-year-old men. There were brackets. We can make brackets for songs, and so we're like, okay. So we developed brackets based on genre. We had brackets for pop. We had brackets for country. We had brackets for rap. We had brackets for electronica. I made them do that. They were not pro electronica. And I was like, look, I'm sorry. I was there. There was electronica happening in the 90s. And I'm going to make you guys listen to it. And it's up to you if you like it or not. And so I'm going to see if I can open. Okay, do you guys see that bracket? No? All right, I might need to, hold on one second. Okay. Okay, so here we go. So this is the grunge rock alternative bracket. Now you're wondering, well, okay, how do you seed them? And yeah, there was great debate about this. And what we came up with, which is a flawed metric, but one that worked, was that we went by Spotify plays. All right, so the songs that had the most Spotify plays were ranked higher. And so then Sean Bledsoe, who, man, got extra credit for this, okay, built these brackets. And then we seeded them, and then we voted, playing snippets of these in class, and we voted on these songs, eventually coming down to the amount of every genre had a certain number of songs that were sort of given to it based on the number of songs that we had gathered from that particular genre. Now, there was strategic voting involved. I'm pretty sure there was corruption. I pity my colleagues in the rhetoric department who had classrooms next to that classroom because it got loud in there on a regular basis. But I mean, just sort of looking at this bracket, and you can see in the vote totals that you get here. This one right here, You Get What You Give. From the Pretenders and Loser by Beck. You Get What You Give won 7-6. I was irate. I think that's ridiculous. Beck, deserved a place, I think, a little bit further on down the line. I can share these brackets with you guys, but yeah, but this whole thing was kind of hilarious. Let me hold on. But what we should do, let me just show you where we wound up. Okay, so this is the 90s tutorial final mix. All right. Shout out to Sean Bledsoe for the brackets. Tanner Quackenbush put together the album art. You have everyone doing their best boy band impression here. And that's the list that we came up with. Do we have any strong feelings from, do we see the list?
No, you need to switch screens.
Oh man. Okay, hold on. There we go. Okay. So this is the final list. Responses to what we see here.
Most
For
of
the
this is
record,
stuff my kid would listen to.
I did not know the Backstreet Boys were in the 90s.
Okay.
That was not my 90s.
It was not my 90s either. It was not my 90s either. But yeah, it's tail end of the 90s. They consider it to be the 90s. It's technically within the Klosterman range. So we had to, so we did include it. And I also have to tell you, they know that song. I Want It That Way. They you haven't heard anything until you've heard 16 Wabash freshmen harmonize spontaneously I Want It That Way on the second floor of the Fine Arts Center. It was something.
Well, I'm a class of the 1991, so very much Gen Xer. And my guess is that if my Wabash classmates and I got together and came up with a list of 18, we might have about 4 songs that overlap. I think it looks way, way different.
Yep.
Yeah, it's got range to it for sure, but I think it's not as heavy in certain areas where I would expect it to be.
I guess I'm surprised. I'm surprised at the lack of REM, the lack of U2. What's wrong with these people?
Pearl Jam.
Yeah, no Pearl Jam.
I think a lot of this is like, from pop culture, and then you think about like, well, from current culture, current media and stuff like that. And then you think about the generation that's more in the current media they were late 90s folks.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I said, I literally I shoehorned, because I'm the professor of the class and I can do this. I shoehorned Dave Matthews on there. I was like, look, I'm just saying, like, this is a thing. I was there. I saw him in concert in '93. He's going to be in the mix here. Okay. And it was totally poo-pooed.
I can't believe he's not. That's so upsetting. He's still big too.
Thank you. Thank you. But yeah, the REM, U2, it's not that I didn't try. Okay.
Of all the Michael Jackson songs to make the list, that one?
Yes.
Joe,
I'm surprised he made it at all, given his history, but that one, really?
Yeah, I know.
Well, this is a trivial example, perhaps. Maybe it's not. Some of us take our music very seriously, so I shouldn't use the term trivia when it comes to important music during our growing up years. But isn't it an interesting point that history, when it's defined by those who actually lived it, will often be different than the history that is by historians who didn't actually live during that period? It can look wildly different.
Yeah.
Mike, you're right. And I keep thinking too, like if I was talking to my parents about music in the 50s, my list and their list, I would be Elvis Presley. Who else? That's, and they'd have probably 20 other guys. So yeah.
I was struck, Jim. I reminded when we talked this morning about a little bit of a bookend with my freshman year. We had a speaker on campus by the name of Todd Gitlin, who had just written a book about the 60s. And to think about us of a generation that were born in the very tail end of the 60s, or 68, 69, and to think about what we thought the 60s were like compared to the generations before us who actually had experienced it, right? So parallelism is not lost on me as far as coming up with a mixtape, because I think those of us who are of the 90s might just fall back on Woodstock bands and Simon and Garfunkel, right?
Yeah, no. I think that's true. Yeah. So let me just stop share. I haven't had a chance to look in the chat. Yeah, Green Day. I can't believe that Mariah Carey is not on the list. She was, I know. Oh, that's so funny. Dave Matthews came to Wabash? I didn't know that.
Yeah, advancement friends, I'm going to need that story tomorrow, please. Immediately.
What year was that? We had Matthew Sweet one year. I don't remember DMB.
That's devastating.
Wow.
Hey, we've had Foghat on campus, all right? So just calm down.
So live was there in 92.
Wow.
So
Confirmed.
right before they got big.
Were the Bodines on campus?
Yeah, my senior year.
They
Yeah,
were there.
And then and if you go late 90s, you had Outcast was on campus.
Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Toad the Wet Sprocket and
De La Soul, Hugh. We had De La Soul too.
De La Soul was on campus.
Yep.
Yeah.
Tracy Chapman.
Yep, in the chapel.
Oh, that's great. So I mean I have now that I have you guys here, I'd like to just ask if you were going to, if I were going to teach this class again, and I mentioned the text that I used, the films that we screened, the historical events that we talked about, like what would you include?
Oh, Singles. Great 90s dating single flick. I saw it when I was in college with the perspective I had was very, very real at the time.
Okay, so Singles, excellent.
Is
My
Pulp
girlfriend
Fiction in the
recommended it.
90s or is that past?
Pulp Fiction is 94.
Okay, Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, it's funny. I went back and forth because you kind of have to do a Tarantino, and I went with Reservoir Dogs mostly because I thought it possible that more students would have seen Pulp Fiction and perhaps not Reservoir Dogs. As it turned out, very few students had seen Pulp Fiction. So it's possible I would probably go to that.
What about Boys in the Hood?
Boys in the Hood or Menace to Society, yeah.
Boys in the Hood was part of our cultures and traditions class in 1994 or 95, spring of 95.
Wow. Okay.
Do the right
I'd recommend
is Do
Office
the Right Thing
Space.
in the 90s? Do the Right Thing's in the 90s.
Yeah, Do the Right Thing.
No, Do the Right Thing was like 88, 89, I believe.
Okay. It's all a blur.
Well, within the bookend, but
it counts. That should count. And you know I love Do the Right Thing. And man, I mean it's I seriously
Your New York City class.
But you know what? I use it in my New York City class, and I also use it when I teach intro to film. So it's like I sort of felt that I wasn't going to go that route, but it is. I mean, an amazing film.
Swingers, Dr. Cherry. I don't know about Swingers.
Swingers, killer soundtrack.
Killer.
Right. And there was that whole ska thing that happened in like 96, 97, 98. Everybody was swing dancing.
Yep.
Yeah. That might be one of those historical moments that slips through the crack unless this class pushes it to the fore. Cool. I was thinking about like novels or plays.
Too long, but Bonfire of the Vanities.
Okay.
Not the movie, the book.
Right.
Yeah, and when was Wall Street? Was that too late?
That's 80s.
It's like 85.
Yeah.
I'm way too old. I need to stop talking.
Listen, it all kind of squishes. It all kind of squishes together. It's funny. There's a heartbreaking work of staggering genius by Dave Eggers. I don't know. Did you guys ever read that book? Great late 90s, terrific novel. But it's funny. There's like the really good novels from the 90s. A lot of them are kind of experimental. Like Infinite Jest is like probably maybe the most famous 90s novel, and imposing that on freshmen would be catastrophic beyond. So yeah, I sort of settled with High Fidelity. For those of you who know the novel, it's a challenging novel. It's Nick Hornby, is a pretty, is still a popular writer, and it kind of depicts this guy Rob who is trying to get over this past romance, and he's putting together this list of all of these of the significant loves of his life, and he's just trying to deal. And he has like this kind of failure to launch issue, which I think it is sort of a '90s cultural meme. I think, for lack of a better word.
I think High Fidelity works on so many levels because the movie, it's one of the few cases where the movie adaptation, even though they moved it to Chicago so that Cusack could be in it, really follows the novel very well. But also, too, given a context where you're teaching young men, it is a great novel when you're talking about, when women say, I don't understand men, I would say, read this novel because the dichotomy with us trying to work through our adulthood and all of and especially given past romances or relationships is really well explored in this book.
No, for sure. And it's interesting. The students were really into High Fidelity, and they really had deeply conflicted feelings about the protagonist. Like there was a deep desire, I think, for these students to be like, Rob, just like get over yourself, dude. Like, stand up, not, dust yourself off. There's other fish in the sea. Go back to college. Get a hold of yourself.
You're never going to hook up with Catherine Zeta-Jones, Rob. Just deal with that. My God.
But it's also like, man, so much about of the fear and angst of men in their 20s is expressed in Rob's insecurities. And I mean, it was a really effective text. I was happy we did it. Other texts, other films, other maybe issues. Fight Club.
How about Angels in America?
We did Angels in America.
Oh, okay.
Game of Thrones was written in the 90s.
What did? I'm sorry,
Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones.
What about shows? Because like South Park got its start in the 90s.
Yeah, and it's still going. Right. It's still in existence.
There's a show that you can't watch that you can't stream anymore because of the music in it, but because of they didn't get the rights to the music. But Northern Exposure.
Oh, that's so good.
Oh yeah.
Which really, I went back and watched the first couple seasons, and boy, do they hold up. I mean, definitely ahead of its time.
Much better than
Gen
Friends.
Z, I was born in 98, but I have to shout out SpongeBob, which did premiere in 1999, and it's a cultural icon. So,
well, what about Seinfeld? I mean, it went from 89 to 98.
Yep.
I mean,
yeah.
And I checked it this time. I'm looking it up on Google, so I'm not just.
I think Dr. Cherry, too, on that note, The Simpsons debuted in the 90s and it's still running. The first animated series.
Yeah. That was when I stopped watching it. So I don't, neither here nor there. But yeah, totally. I mean, The Simpsons, there is like a lot of long running shows. We had a student do a paper on, he referenced The Simpsons a little bit, but he did a lot of work on Ren and Stimpy. Do you guys remember Ren and Stimpy?
Oh,
yeah. It is as perverse and as gross as you remember it, but also so just wicked and subversive, and yeah.
I'm talking a lot about television because I worked in TV, and that was the 90s was the birth of reality television as well.
Yeah.
Real World.
The original Real World.
It started and it went from there. So,
right. That's right.
I'm
glad Married with Children
cartoon
for cartoon stuff because just today a kid asked me, okay, Mr. Young, rank these 3 networks: Cartoon Network, Disney Channel, and Nickelodeon. And I really had to sit back and think. I'm like, oh man, I love all 3 of these. But now thinking about them in the 90s, I mean, like Cartoon Network with their funky introductions, Nickelodeon with like the splat intro, and Disney Channel with like the kids jumping in the air and like making the little mouse sign. And I'm like, man, like those were the times. And I know it kind of bled into the 2000s, but yeah, SpongeBob, Ren and Stimpy, Adult Swim in its infancy. Like, does anyone remember Home Movies? The guy who's the lead voice actor for Bob's Burgers, he was the coach in Home Movies, and that was like Adult Swim's like, yeah. There was someone just asked me about that today, and I'm just like, oh man, all 3 of those definitely in the 90s were like my go-to channels, but Cartoon Network was my choice for number 1.
DJ, it is so good to see your face, man.
It's good to see you too. I miss you, man.
You too, Corey Egler. Oh my God. No, that's great. Other possible texts for me to
not text, but does anybody remember the 120 Minutes show? 120 Minutes on MTV.
Yep.
That where Beavis and Butthead got their start, and Ian Flux, and
yes, Ian Flux.
That was Liquid Television.
Oh, that was Liquid Television. Okay.
Yeah.
It started in the 80s, but Full House 5, I think.
Full House. All right. You guys are so.
I was going to add something that's interesting about a show that's gone across generations. I guess I'm not saying how great it was, but Saturday Night Live is so much better in the 90s than it is now. I think kids have such a different perception of Saturday Night Live. Seeing back in, Jim Carrey,
yeah. Or even, I mean, In Loving Color.
In Living Color,
yeah.
Which was huge.
And Mad TV.
Mad TV.
True. Yeah, you're talking on the subject of text. Our generation, I think we got burnt out on all the O.J. Simpson stuff. I mean, it was fascinating for the time, and then we were done. We were kind of done talking about it, thinking about it. But this generation probably knows very little. They could probably come up with a sentence too on the story. And Jeffrey Toobin probably wrote the best book called Run for Your Life. And so if you really wanted to go, and it's good because I reread it like 2-3 years ago. It came out maybe 2 years after the trial. And then I reread it just a couple of years ago. Holds up well. And my recollection was it also does a nice job of creating the culture, going back into what life was like in 1994, 1995, 1996 when that happened. So you could probably read it for reasons that go beyond just the story and the trial.
Excellent. Awesome.
I would try to find a way to fold in, and I'm from Chicago, so this is why, the 90s Bulls teams. I mean, that whole experience with that group of guys was spectacular.
Yeah.
Well, to jump in on that,
and the Bears.
And to jump in on that, I'd say that was when Jordan and athlete branding really took off. You kind of had OJ, but OJ was past his playing days, whereas you had Jordan at the height of his peak and selling shoes because Republicans buy shoes too, and Gatorade and all those things. And I think you'd also really just historically have to throw in Ruby Ridge and Waco and OKC because they're all interrelated. And a lot of the same characters from the FBI and all that stuff too.
So on the sports too, let's not forget, the baseball strike of 1994, and then the home run.
The start of the steroid era.
Absolutely, that nobody really cared that all these guys, the 2 guys that were vying for home runs, the home run derby, and that still has after effects because those guys are still come up on the ballot every year, and they kind of get ignored, and it's see who's going to blink to get whether these guys get in the Hall of Fame or not. So I want to respect our time, so I don't want to end the discussion. So we can extend this for anybody who would like, but if anybody needs to leave, I want to respect that as well. And just so we could put this in here, our next After the Bell will be Monday, March 13th at 7:30 p.m. It'll be Eastern Daylight Time because we will just switch to daylight time. We will have Wabash legend Coach Mac Petty talking about the history of basketball from 1892 to the present. So look for that. And then also too, I'd love Jim to give a plug for upcoming shows at the theater department, and then we can continue our discussion.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Next week we have a production of a play called Stage Kiss, written by Sarah Rule, directed by Michael Abbott, class of '85. And that will be in the experimental theater. We have a professional actress from Boston who will be working with the students on that. That'll be an excellent. And then later on in April, I'm going to be doing a production of Hand to God by Robert Askins, a decidedly naughty puppet show. That'll be happening, not appropriate for children, in April. Thank you, Hugh.
Okay, sure.
I love Stage Kids. Oh my God, I got to see it in San Francisco. It's such a, first of all, Sarah Rule is a great playwright.
Yep.
But that's such a great play.
We're very pumped. We're very pumped. All right, guys. It is, man, this is such a pleasure. It's good to see and talk to my former students, my fellow Gen Xers. Rise up, okay? It was great talking with you guys, yeah, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Hey Jim, just as a general question from someone class of '97, so firmly a young adult in the '90s. What were the general attitudes of your students toward the '90s? Versus one of looking at it with reverence, or more of a patronizing look, or I mean, was there a general theme on how these guys now view the '90s?
It was no. It was those were the good years. Those were the good years. That it was
so analogous to the '50s when Gen Xers were growing up.
I was thinking about that analogy, maybe, which makes Clinton into Eisenhower, which I don't know, maybe, but yeah, it is. They look back on that time, and maybe this is how their parents describe it, as being a simpler era. Yeah, that it was a good time, and yeah, I mean, if you think about the relief from the end of the Cold War to the fact that the internet isn't going to run everybody's lives, like there was a lot to be. Yes, thank you, Carrie.
So as a college student, as a Wabash student during the early to mid '90s, I'm glad that we didn't have social media and internet and cameras on in everybody's pocket.
Yep. So I've got that Chuck Klosterman book here, and I read it when it came out a year or so ago. And there's one part that I bookmarked because I always thought it was interesting. I'm not sure I 100% agree, but this is kind of what I think your class was alluding to. Let me read a very, very short paragraph on the '90s. No stories were viral. No celebrity was trending. The world was still big. The country was still vast. You could still be a little person with your own little life and your own little thoughts. You didn't have to have an opinion, and nobody cared if you did or did not. You could be alone on purpose, even in a crowd.
Yeah.
I love the part in the book where he talks about the biggest smear you could put on somebody back then was you're a sellout. Yep. And what do we have now? We have influencers. So you have sold out. Right?
Professional sellouts.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's selling out as a lifestyle choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Again, thank you, you guys. This was super fun. I need to actually go and pick up my kids. They're at the Vanity Theater. I should be plugging this. They're doing Frozen Junior, the musical, at the Vanity.
Beautiful.
And my daughters are Olaf's friends. Not an impressive role at all. But we all start somewhere, I think. So
excellent.
Thank you, Jim.
And just before we leave, look for a survey in your inbox tomorrow. Let us know what you think. That helps us. And also, we've got a line in there for suggestions for future topics. So thank you, Dr. Cherry. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And everybody have a great night.
Okay. Thanks a lot, you guys.
Thank you.